What if there is nothing for you to chase or change or improve? What if today you get to relate to yourself as perfectly enough, just the way you are? What would you do on a day like that? There is so much pressure and ideas about self-improvement. Formulas for how we should be and what we should do. But we may be doing ourselves and our brains a real disservice by always chasing these recipes and expectations that were written by somebody else. Maybe the real magic happens when we can approach our own self-exploration, our own evolution without judgment. When we can find ways to release these shackles of perfectionism and instead allow ourselves to play with what we have and the experiences that we have been given. As usual, I want to give you an out. So if you're driving, you can skip right away. No, I'm just kidding. You can drive if you want. But what I do want to ask of you is to take a breath and another one. And maybe even put a hand on your heart and get really curious. Do you feel like you have the resources inside you and outside you to digest something new right now? Are you actually receptive to insight and opinions that you are unfamiliar with? If no, congratulations on recognizing that. For real. You have the most beautiful opportunity to say something nice to yourself. Do it now, out loud. And choose something really self-compassionate about how you set up the rest of your day. And you're always welcome back. I mean, please do come back if you're curious, but first, make sure you have the space to take it in. And if you're here, yes, Maria and I invite you to step in with a playful mind. If you want, even take out a notebook, listen attentively. If something lands, pause, write it down, collect the nuggets of gold, sit there and untwine it all, And if not, just flow along for the unfolding. Welcome. It's been a long time since we spoke, Maria.
It has. It's been way too long.
Way too long, and I'm super excited to be here with you.
But it's always amazing to talk to you, and I think we always get into really interesting discussions. We kind of find our ways through our mutual experiences to view things from different viewpoints. So I'm always excited talking to you. So I was really, really happy when you reached out to me.
Oh, thank you. Same. That's why I reached out. I was thinking back on other conversations that we had and how often I feel like one thing that I've taken away from learning from you previously is a little bit relating to my brain as a part that I can have a discussion with.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what's a conversation that you've been having with your own brain recently?
Oh, with my own brain. I've been reading a lot of research lately on growth mindset. And since growth mindset is something that has both a trait and a state component to it, meaning we have the part that is already kind of integrated into our brain through experience, and then it fluctuates over time and space. And so I've been having maybe not conversations, but a bit more awareness of what types of mindsets pop up in different situations and doing this reframing. And this is something I did work on quite a few years back when I first read, the book by Carol S. Dweck. But then it has kind of fallen a little bit into the background. And now reading about the updated science of it, there's quite a few different articles coming out. It sort of reignited this interest in me to explore that a little bit further.
What have you learned about yourself in that process?
I've learned that I do have a lot of what is called a fixed mindset that comes from my experiences back through life, but also that I can't discount that I do have growth mindset within certain areas and that I can kind of learn from the parts where I do have it and try to apply that into the thought patterns that are more fixed for me. Because I know that I have the ability to frame things that way. It makes it easier to consider that I can just shift how I use that. I can direct it in a way.
Let's nerd into this a little because you and I both are familiar with this terminology, but I don't know what it's like for anyone who's listening. What does it mean to have a fixed versus a growth mindset?
So, a growth mindset is the understanding that our abilities can develop through intentional effort. And when you have a fixed mindset, you have this belief that your abilities are fixed. They come with you from the start, and the abilities you have do not change. And it creates a feeling of measurements. Everything becomes a judgment between good and bad. I am either good and bad as a person or as this thing. And I need to prove to myself and others that I am good in order to maintain my identity and my self esteem. Whilst in a growth mindset, you are aware of the fact that talent or ability is just a starting point to which you can develop and grow and fulfill your potential. And that failures is truly just data and learning points and the next step in moving forward. And so, of course, there's a lot of positive things that comes with having a growth mindset and a lot of restricting things that comes when you're more in this fixed mindset. But as I said before, we all have a kind of a blend of them and different levels. So it's not as black and white as it's sometimes presented in the media.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that was, as you were talking, that was a reflection that I had. I think we can probably never be fully growth mindset. Or can we?
I don't think anyone is. I think through our development, we all develop different filters for how we view the world. This is something that happens physically in the brain. That filtering becomes a form of baseline to how much we are growth oriented or how much we are believing in fixed abilities. And then from that, for everyone, this will shift over time. There might be different situations where you have more of a growth mindset, and there might be different situations when your resources are lower and it's more difficult to access that. So it's a much more dynamic process than I think most people believe.
I think as I'm listening to you, I think what something that's interests me at least is how do we come to see and observe the places where we're fixed?
I think those are the things when we have emotional reactions that feel restrictive. So, for example, I struggle with criticism. I have very much of a performance based self esteem. I crave the validation that comes from good performance and, having inherent talent and like, oh, this is just who you are. This is coming so naturally. So when I receive criticism or there are clear failures, I get defensive because it's hurting my identity. It's threatening my self-esteem. So then the self-esteem becomes very much dependent on outside influences. So when things are going good, you feel great. When things are not going so good, you feel like shit. And you believe that this is because you are shit. So when you get this emotional reaction or you feel triggered by something and you tend to feel defensive or self-deprecating or sad, that is a signal that you might have thought processes in the back that are telling you that this thing that is happening is not a data point, it's a judgment.
Ooh, it's not a data point, it's a judgment. That's a big one. Okay, letting that land.
Oh,
Ooh.
you can do a lot of reflection on that one.
Yeah. Ooh.
Ooh.
I like that. I like that. It's not a data point, it's a judgment. It reminds me of when I was working in corporate, I would say there's a difference between insight and opinion,
Ah, yeah.
and how often we don't know the difference. We
Mm.
don't know the difference between what is, even if objectivity is difficult, but what can be observed through data
Yeah.
as truth, more or less, and what is our shaped opinion of something
Yeah.
or our judgment. And I've seen it both on an individual scale and on a collective scale, how easy it is to mix those two up.
Yeah, and it comes natural from the functioning of the brain, because as the brain develops, what it does is that it creates predictions of what the world is supposed to be like, and it creates filters through how to see the world. And the more something is repeated, whether it is information, a behavior, or an experience, the more it gets ingrained into the brain and the stronger that filter becomes. Because the brain is constantly looking for errors and mismatches between what it believes to be true and what the information coming in is. And when there is a discrepancy, the brain needs to decide if it's going to trust itself or the incoming information more. So, to update your model of the world, your brain needs to believe more in the incoming information than its own experience based view of the world, which is hard to do. So, this leads us to literally see reality different. And it makes it very difficult for us to understand that we see reality different and that we're coming from different viewpoints, and that what someone else sees as a true data point, someone else will see as an opinion. So they do get muddled because we have different brains.
Yeah, it just brings up this saying, seeing is believing, but I also know a lot of people twist it around to say believing is seeing.
Yeah, and that comes from the fact that both goes. What we see does get processed in the brain, but it gets filtered through how much we believe what we see. So when your brain is updating the model of the world, then seeing is believing. When the brain chooses to not update its model, as we do with bias and prejudice, believing is seeing. So both of them happens, and in every moment your brain is deciding which one to use, and it will side with itself when it has had more experience-based information confirming that view than what is coming in.
So that makes me curious, is you also talk about this ability we have then to rewrite or reprogram or make a different choice in that moment that we're met with. Of course, our brain is doing all this outside of our sense of choice most often. So, what do we do with that? How is it that we get to leverage the seeing, these observations, these sentiments to actually help the brain to start making different predictions, start generating something different? How do we help ourselves out there?
I believe that the first step is knowledge. It's understanding that this is how the brain actually processes information and that this is also the reason why the brain develops the way it does. And I think one of the major problems we have with self-help is that we have a belief that we have our struggles because there's something inherently wrong with us. And there's not, because the brain has developed these struggles because it is doing exactly what it is supposed to do for you to function optimally in the environment you were in as a child. So it doesn't have anything to do with inherent flaws. It doesn't have anything to do with willpower. It has to do with the normal functioning of the brain. And when we start understanding this, we can try to find the tiny gap that comes between something happening and a decision. So there's a tiny gap where you can choose reaction or decision. But this is also dependent on your baseline and your resources. Because the next mistake we make when it comes to self-help is that everybody is the same effort will lead to the same result. And if you don't have results, it's because you didn't have enough character or willpower. And this is a very privileged viewpoint that we hold because most of the information coming in around self-help comes from privileged people because they have a voice. So then we tend to stigmatize people with more severe struggles or less resources as just not as strong. And this is really problematic because it leaves people believing that they are less able to do something because of something within themselves, not realizing that they don't have the same baseline because they didn't have maybe the same development. If you didn't grow up with supportive, loving caregivers, you have a very different baseline for a lot of abilities and skills than if you did. There's a difference between effort and effort. Rich, educated, connected effort gives you more. And this is something that we need to understand when we think about ourselves and we think about where we are and where we're trying to go. And I believe that understanding your baseline, understanding where you're coming from, understanding how your brain developed and how that made you to who you are today, because your brain is functioning perfectly, not because there's something wrong with you, and how this affects how you act and view the world, that is a good starting point to start looking at, okay, but then what are the primary things that would give me most value to change? And also, when you talk about change, to remember that the choice kind of lands in between what change would give the most payout, what change would be most valuable to me if I achieve it, versus what change is most accessible given the current circumstances. Because often we go for, this is what I need to change because it would make the biggest difference in my life, not realizing that your current baseline and resources does not allow for that level of change maybe right now. There is something else that is more accessible that you can use as a building block, and that maybe should be used as a building block.
I like that. And hearing you, I also, when I hear you say accessible, I kind of hear it in two tracks. One is, of course, what's accessible to you, externally resourced.
Mm.
What can you access or pay for or get help with? But I'm also thinking about what's accessible to you inside. Because I often feel like when we go into this vortex that is personal development and we get sucked into all of these idealistic ways of how things should be and how we should work and how we should set up our routine and the way we should be able to handle criticism or feedback or whatever. And there is always this very ideal state. And sometimes that's too big. Like it's too far for us to start being in that state because it's so far removed from our current reality. It's so threatening to our system. It's so far from our stories and our programming from childhood that going into doing something then it just sends us steps back instead. So I think when I hear you talking about access, I think about both of those pieces. And even I know I find myself talking to people about finding opportunities in their growth or in with their ideas or with their creation that feel like a stretch but not a threat. And at the same time as you're talking, I'm also very aware that then we need to first even have that awareness of the nuance between them. And we don't, like, that also takes time to develop. You have to first actually fail a few times and stretch yourself a little bit too far, probably, or do something that doesn't feel good. Yeah, so I don't know. I think I'm thinking as listening to you about access in more dimensions than resource, also having this presence with what's possible for me.
I really love that framing, that think of it as a stretch but not a threat. I think that's a very good framing for sort of where your limit is at the moment. And I think you definitely, it needs to be mentally accessible to you, depending on what your background is. Some things are not. Sometimes you need to work with a professional on things. There are things that are very, very difficult to solve ourselves, and we need that support. And I also think that when we struggle with something, we tend to look at the most superficial causes first. So we tend to look at what is it in the situation that makes me feel bad. That must be the problem, and that is what we're trying to solve. So an example is that for the majority of my life, I believed that I needed to get more organized. If I would just be better organized, I would not be anxious. I feel overwhelmed and I feel anxious. And if I would just know everything I need to do and be on top of that, I would feel at peace and happy and my life would be great. So for years, I consumed a lot of advice on organization skills, and I've been trying apps and, the GTD method and all of those things to realize that they are definitely helpful when it comes to organization, but it didn't help my anxiety or my overwhelm because the organization was never the problem. The problem was something much deeper underlying. And that was the part I need to work on in order to reduce the anxiety. The organization, if that works great, sure, then that's a bonus, but it's not the cause. But it was the superficial thing triggering my emotions, making me believe that this is the problem.
I love that we confuse also the trigger or the symptom with the root causes.
Yeah, because we don't understand the root causes yet. And you need to gradually build on those. So I needed a lot of time to kind of peel that onion, to realize that, okay, I have one issue to work with. And once I worked with that, something deeper emerged. And then I realized, oh, darn it. Now I need to work on this thing. And you do, and it moves ahead over time. And then, you peel that layer and then something deeper emerges. And then you just feel like a never ending onion. That just
Never ending onion.
You're a never ending onion and it just keeps going. And that's understandable because it is a process that keeps going, I think, throughout life. But then there's also this aspect of like, we don't need to change all the time. We don't need to change everything. There's nothing wrong with us. If there are parts of us that are not working, that are creating anxiety or issues in our life, then absolutely that might be something that we want to work on if we have the current external and mental resources to do so. But if we don't want to change, that's fine as well. We live in this hustle culture where everything is Instagram worthy and we're supposed to be successful in whatever way society thinks success should look like. And then we try to get there. But maybe that's not what we should do. Everybody has a different level of how they want to be. And there, I think it's important to try to find, what do I value in life? What are my values? What are the things that are important to me? And those are the things I should focus on. And maybe looking amazing isn't something that is in line with my values. Maybe it is. There's nothing wrong with wanting to look a certain way or be a certain way. Like we all have different ideas, but if it's something that you try to do because of validation from society rather than coming from your own values, then even if you achieve that thing, it's not necessarily going to make you happier or more content with your life, because it's not coming from your deeper values in a way. So I think that might also be a starting point when it comes to dealing with this jungle of self-help and self-improvement, as we call it, and everything else. I know I call it self-improvement as well in my videos, which I'm trying to correct now when I'm realizing what it sounds like. To understand that it's not about improving anything. It is about figuring out how to live more aligned with your own values.
Yeah. Oh, there are so many threads I could pick up here, but I want to just dwell on the very recent thought. And I think personally, this has been a huge rewrite for me in the past few years of actually not talking about this choice that I make for the way that I live, which is relating to my own possibility to evolve. But I kind of stopped saying that it's about me being better. It's not about me being better. It's about me being more of myself.
Yeah.
And every choice that I'm making, how much of myself am I bringing into the room, or am I able, or how much of myself can I support myself to conjure into the things that I create, into the conversations that I have. And sometimes that's a lot, and sometimes it's less. And if it's less, that's information for me to be curious about. It's not a failure, it's just a reality. And when I started doing that, because I'm very much of a similar background to you, a very achievement oriented, very performance oriented, always chasing the grades, always chasing those things. And at some point, it made me really tired. And it felt like everywhere I was a stage that I needed to perform on and live up to expectations. And somehow, with this rewrite, for me at least, it allowed me to just say, hey, the biggest way I can serve anything that I do in any space that I do is to be as whole as possible with myself. Not meaning perfect in any standard, just as honest as possible with who I am and what I can do and what I can bring. And it took so much pressure off. And I think the other thing that you brought up that really stuck with me is also time and this layering. I feel like there's so much stuff out there that will point us to this, and there's this expressway. Like, there is no expressway. If you want to evolve, that's a lifestyle choice. It's not a one-off project that you do for 3 months and now you're super evolved. No, it's a choice that you make every day. You wake up and you make it every day. It's questions that you have with yourself every day, and the willingness to peel that onion of issues. Or there's a therapist called David Bedrick that I've been following. He talks about unshaming, and he calls it flowering.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh, I like that better than onions. They're less stinky. It kind of is beautiful, you know. You can be flowering all the time, but then there are always like more petals, more things, and
But you have these onions that turn into the Easter flowers.
yes.
We can combine.
We can combine onions and flowers. We do that.
But I think on the topic of finding yourself in Western society, especially women, we're socialized to not really have a self. You know, this saying that the ideal woman is selfless. That's actually a horrible thing. We don't think about it, but like, what does that mean? You're selfless. It means that you exist for others rather than understanding who you are yourself. And I think we're very much socialized to give space to others and care for others and diminish ourselves and not learn about ourselves. So I think that's a journey that looks in our society different for men and women.
I'm curious, is there brain-wise a difference for men and women?
There's a lot of discussions around biological differences between men and women, and often it is used to reinforce patriarchal views. Since the brain develops through experience and literally wires through experience, my belief, this is not founded in any specific science that I have looked at, but my personal belief is that the physical differences that we find when we study the brains of men and women are, to at least some extent, possibly to a large extent, caused by the difference in experience we have growing up.
Yeah. And I guess that's true for everyone, right? We all have a different set of experiences that will shape us. That really stayed with me, what you said a bit earlier also about our choices as children.
Mm.
I don't know where you are on your journey with this or your self conversation, but I'm definitely finding that a lot of the patterns that I'm uprooting at the moment, where I'm being curious and asking myself, wow, why am I choosing this? I can see how a 4-year-old or a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old chose that strategy as a
Yeah.
super safe strategy. Like there's nothing wrong with the strategy. It's perfect for that
Yeah.
purpose of what a child can choose with the resources that are accessible to them. And it's really interesting to go, wow, okay, that's been around, that's been here for a long time. And I think even going back to what you said around the sense of self, it's also how much of those layers of like programming that we then think are our personality.
Yeah. One of the most important things that I try to provide as a message through the different content I'm making, through going and speaking, is that your brain developed during a time in your life when you were not in control of your experiences. And this means that many of the struggles you have were planted in your brain by your environment. So that was caregivers, peers, and society. Because as children, we are entirely dependent on people around us. We cannot choose our environment. We cannot choose our experiences. So nothing of that, the brain that you develop is simply the brain that you got based on circumstances that were not under your control. And then we're left with this brain as adults that is trying to function in an environment that might not even be there anymore. But we're still using the same coping mechanisms because this is what your brain learned that you need to do in order to stay safe. And it's very difficult to undo those patterns, even if the environment changes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I'm just thinking, I've definitely been guilty of seeing myself even recreating familiar patterns that were bad for me because they're the familiar patterns that I felt I could deal with.
Yeah.
And
The brain is always going back to the model that it built. The more things are repeated, the more behaviors, information, or experiences are repeated, the stronger the brain will weigh this model against what we see in reality or what we are trying to cognitively tell ourselves.
This makes me want to segue into something that I think you and I have separately spoken about in different ways, which is play. I think it's a perfect thing to relate to also with kids, because if there's one thing I've observed going into this is that we associate play a lot with being like a child. And of course, like, children use play to understand the world, to evolve, to learn, for better or worse, right? They learn through this play a lot of different things. But to that point, if we come back to where we were, which is being aware of, okay, I'm here as an adult in an environment that isn't the same as the one that started making all of these predictions. How can play have a role in that? This is something I'm always curious about. And I feel like people feel like that's a very charged word, because it feels like I'm asking them to build Legos on the floor or play dress up, but that's usually not what I mean.
I think that's why we confuse play with a playful mind. Play is the action that comes from a playful mind. And play can be many more different things than the type of play that children engage in. And so the conundrum in the brain is that if we're trying to constantly match the predictions we make with reality, with as little mismatch as possible, play doesn't really make sense, because we would just stay in a very predictable environment and not do much, because then everything would match and we would be happy. But the thing is, the world is constantly changing. So the brain needs to understand how well it is doing at adapting. And there is something called the slope of error reduction, which means how fast the brain can resolve the discrepancy between its view and reality and make those match. And this is what play is. Play is the brain creating challenges that are on just the right level that we can solve it at a faster speed. And this is why it creates joy, and it creates a feeling of engagement and motivation. And it also is the most efficient way to learn things. So there is a form of, neuroscientific explanation of what play is. And as you say, this is something that children naturally have and naturally use. Because it is their way of learning and understanding the world, and they're testing things and they're testing boundaries and they're finding just that right level. But as adults, we tend to move away from play because we get more focused on exploiting the things that we already know and that are already working for us, because that is more efficient and it is safer. So we tend to move away from exploring to exploiting. And exploring is looking for challenges and solving them. And playing is creating challenges and solving them.
Exploiting versus exploring. That's such a poignant way of putting it. I know I've been, for a few years since I listened to this Andrew Huberman episode on play, I think he described it as a risk-free way of exploring opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And his point here was, as soon as you start generating adrenaline, you're not playing anymore. What stuck with me is, exploring, but also eliminating a little bit of the risk for us to, and I think we've touched on this throughout our conversation so far, of not making something too threatening. Because then our curiosity disappears and we become defensive and we become closed down and it spirals in a way that doesn't allow us to be explorative anymore. Whether or not, I'm sure there are a lot of divided opinions, and maybe since there have been other things that have come out. But I think what stuck with me is still the sense of exploration and what is asked of us to remain explorative, to remain curious, to like stay with our growth mindset and go, okay, what's possible, rather than this kind of fast-paced efficiency.
A playful mind is when you release pressure, external pressure. They actually did a study where they put people in front of Lego and they showed them a little Lego duck and they gave them the pieces and they asked them to build another 5 ducks. So there are 2 groups. One was just told, like, build 5 ducks. And the other group was told, do it, but do it playfully. And so the thing that happened was that the people who were just told to build ducks, most of them built 5 identical ducks to the model they were showed, because it became a little bit like a job. It's like you have a task, you do it. This is probably how it should be done. While the people who were in the playfulness condition, they said that they felt a release from external pressure. They felt like, oh, I can do this as I like, and it kind of unlocked a form of creativity. So most of them built 5 different ducks that looked entirely different, and some of them were a bit surprised by their own creativity, and they were more relaxed and they found it to be more fun, just because this feeling of this is a performance was mentally removed. And so being playful can depend on what you're dealing with. For example, if you're doing something that is quite cognitive work, such as research or exploring, learning, programming, something like that, you can be playful with those thoughts and ideas. If you're doing more rote work, it's not as easy maybe to be playful, and then sometimes people take breaks from those to do other playful things to get a form of break and relief. But most things we can approach with a playful mind. And for people who don't necessarily like that phrasing because they still connect playfulness with being childish, not being serious, not being productive, all of those things, you can phrase it as a form of opening creativity in the mind, that you're releasing the external pressures to do it perfectly or doing it the right way. I mean, the right way doesn't even exist. And it opens up an opportunity to just do it in a way. And to figure out along the way what comes out of that.
I love that. What do you think that looks like for us in our own ability to learn from and through life, or to like peel back the layers of our own onion? Because I feel like now we're talking about this in a contained way, right? Here's a project and you can have a playful mind, but what could it look like to have a playful approach to our own evolution, to our own learning? What is that? What could that look like?
What could that look like? Maybe removing this view of there being a specific way to do it, or there being a specific kind of pressure to do it. It's a little bit like, you know where your starting point is, you know what the outcome is supposed to be, but the way to get there can vary. And that is sort of what playfulness is. So you have your starting point, you know what you want to achieve. So for them, it was like, I want to achieve 5 ducks. But how you get to that point can vary and can be something that is more exploring. So maybe I look at an ability that I want to evolve or something I want to change, and I look at where's my starting point, what is the end point I'm looking for, but then allowing yourself to get there in any way possible, that you don't need to follow this strict advice about getting up at 5 a.m. and taking an ice bath. You can actually do it in so many different ways and letting yourself just explore those different ways and then gradually getting there. We need to be better, I think, at making individual choices. And I believe that understanding your own brain is a great starting point for this because it gives us more kindness and compassion towards ourselves and where we are, and the understanding that the way that works for others is not necessarily the way that is supposed to work for me.
I am me and you are you.
Yeah. And we can get to the same place, or we have to get to the same place through different means. And if we understand what makes most sense for ourselves, we can avoid the self-blame that comes from failing at the advice from others.
Yeah, that was a word that was emerging as you were talking. I think this idea of failure, I observe that all the time recently with the kids, how as they evolve and they come into these different phases of their evolution and they're testing boundaries with people externally, with us, within themselves. And recently, I've also really been looking at us as adults and thinking, we just forgot that we need to do the same thing. It's not because we're adult that we're somehow smarter about everything changing, because we're changing. Whether or not we like it, we change, and the environment changes. And we need to meet something to understand, like, here's my boundary, or here's the thing. Oh, I don't like this, or yes, I do like this. And for me, at least, this playful mind or allowing myself to play has also meant that I approach anything I bump into less as failure, more as information.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, so that's a boundary. Hey, that was interesting. I didn't know that was it. Or here's something I really don't want to do anymore.
Yeah.
And actually removing that assumption that I can somehow predict that myself, and instead leading from that question is, what is true right now at this point in time, and how can I find that out? And however I choose to do that, none of it's failure. All of it is abundant, like really rich information for me. And I know that one is so hard because I used to like get so stuck about feeling like I failed.
Yeah.
But it's been one of the most empowering things, I think. Also just going, well, I'll try it out. Like if I can find the smallest, least threatening, most stretchy thing I can do and try,
Yeah. that's
good.
This is exactly when failure moves from judgment to a data point.
Yeah, exactly that. Data points. Collecting data points.
Yeah. And it's not a judgment on who you are or what you're able to do or what your character is or your willpower. It's a data point of where you are right now, all things considered.
Yeah,
That's fine.
that's fine. It's one of the things I say to people and I see them relax is usually when I ask, just tell me what's true right now. You can change your mind in 5 minutes if you want.
That's interesting.
Or you can change your mind next week. Or you can keep thinking, feeling that's true for the next 50 years. I don't care.
Yeah.
Just don't, there's no pressure for this to be true by the end of this conversation. And I think it does what you said here. Like, it takes this pressure off of it having to be right
Yeah.
or perfect or composed or whatever it is that we tell ourselves that it needs to be. It's just, okay, this is true right now. Okay.
Yeah.
And in 30 minutes, we'll check in what feels true right now. Actually, something different. Great.
Yeah. And when we create these judgments and when we judge others, we don't understand that judging others creates rules that we also need to live by. And it becomes a prison for ourselves more than a problem for the others.
I felt that.
And as what you said, I think what is true right now, it doesn't have to be true in the future. It removes this view of this is the reality that I need to live up to, or this is the reality that I am going to be locked into forever.
Yeah. I think this is an interesting also dichotomy between that, like maintaining that openness about where we are and how we feel and who we are, and also still having a sense of integrity and a sense of self in the world. And that in itself can sometimes feel like making us static and constraining ourselves and creating these boxes of judgment and expectation that we need to fit ourselves back into all the time. I mean, even more so with social media, where everyone narrates their personal brand with such care. And then at some point, as you say, it imprisons us because, oh, now I kind of committed to this persona, but actually this isn't true anymore.
It's hard to change an identity that is working because it leaves us vulnerable to critique, and both from ourselves and from others. So we prefer to stick with what is working, even if it's breaking us down.
So what helps us over the threshold? Because I know a lot of people who at some point still look at that bucket of this is breaking me down and finally like jump over to the other side and say, actually, I can't preserve this deconstruction anymore. But it often feels like it comes at a pretty high price.
Yeah. They say that change happens when the option becomes less comfortable than the change itself. So when the option of not changing has a higher price than the effort in changing, that's when we do. But we need to also remember that you need to have the resources to make that jump, and not everybody does at any time. So the people that do achieve that ended up with the stars aligned, that they were at a moment in time when they had the realization, it pushed them hard enough, and they had the current resources to make the jump.
Yeah.
And we expect everyone to be there, but maybe you don't have the baseline you need to be receptive to it. Maybe you don't have the current resources to actually make change. And that doesn't have anything to do with character, ability, or willpower.
No. No, it doesn't. It's a lot of work to commit to those kind of changes. I don't want to say work, maybe it's the wrong word, but it's an investment of ourselves.
A lot of effort, and sometimes that effort is misdirected, or it's not really worth it, or it's just not possible in the moment.
And that's okay too. I never know where these conversations go, which is part of the joy of them. But that was a really lovely unfolding. I'm curious, as somebody listening to this, What do you feel like is an invitation emerging from all the different threads that we've had on the table? What's emerging for someone to move to integrate or playfully approach in their life?
I think the main message is to see how we can be more compassionate with ourselves and be kinder and understand that our brains are functioning exactly the way that they are supposed to try to release some of the pressure and to try to find a more individual route to how we want to be and how to align that with our deeper inner values. Because when we release the pressure, we automatically become more playful. It's a kind of a natural state that we have because the brain wants to constantly adapt to the world. It's what it's looking for. That's why it's measuring errors and looking for mismatches because it wants to partly keep the body in a state that keeps us alive, but also navigate the world in a way that is positive for us. So the brain kind of wants to do things in a playful way because it's the best way for us to live in the world. But we tend to block that because of experiences we had as a child. And we need more compassion and kindness to allow that exploring to emerge.
And I guess something that remains with me is also that we get to dictate what that playfulness and exploration looks like.
Yeah.
There isn't a recipe that somebody can give us. There isn't a prescription. It doesn't mean you have to play with Legos.
Not everything is an ice bath.
No, also not. If it feels playful.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with an ice bath.
No.
If that's what you want, I love that for you. We don't all have to take an ice bath to be successful.
No. You get to choose your own.
So much food for thought. Our brains are molded to our own unique context, often deeply impacted by childhood environments that no longer exist. And making space for our own evolution, for our own being and contentment, is rarely about how precisely we can judge ourselves according to somebody else's measuring stick, but how kindly we can welcome and play with what and who it is that we find as we unpeel our onion or our flower or both. So if you listened and some new insight landed in you, or maybe you had a second of exiting that self-improvement hustle to find a few breaths of soft self-compassion, can I ask a small thing of you? Send this episode on to somebody else who needs it. And if you want to support more conversations about learning from trees, being creative, and expanding our interactions with life, don't forget to follow and rate us on your favorite podcast platform. That's how more people can join this conversation. Thank you so much for listening.